Hello, everyone. I'm Martin Spring from the Management School at Lancaster University, and happy to host this webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping points before I introduce our session today. Could you please make sure your cameras and microphones are off as you join? We're operating in a sort of conventional Teams meeting rather than a webinar to make it more interactive, but during the presentation we need the microphones off. And if you've got questions, I'll mainly bring those together and put them to Ian at the end. So if you can use the Q&A function on Teams, please, not the chat, to add questions as we go along, and then I'll try and knock them into shape for Ian at the end of the session. So we're here for about an hour, and we'll have some time for questions at the end, and perhaps carry on a little bit past the hour. Right now, the formal part. Ian McCarthy is the W.J. Van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Operations Management at the Beedie School of Business at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. Ian and I are both sort of lapsed production engineers, and both did our PhDs on manufacturing strategy in the glory days of that discipline in the 1990s. I noticed in conferences recently it gets sort of lumped into the miscellaneous topics these days of our discipline, but those were the days, the 1990s. And Ian has become a distinguished scholar, very distinguished scholar in his own right in innovation management, and has been in Vancouver for what, 20 years or so. But he's also been a trailblazer, I think, in encouraging management academics, but academics in general as well, to take the use of social media seriously in the academic career. And his paper about getting serious in the use of social media has been cited over 7,500 times, I see, from having a look at Google Scholar today. And so when I took on the role of Associate Dean for Engagement in the Management School at Lancaster, Ian was one of the first people I thought of to somehow contribute and help us in engaging more effectively. So I'm very pleased to welcome him today, and he will help us, I think, to become an open academic using social media. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Martin, and hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. I'm going to share some slides. So hopefully you can see some slides. If you can't, let me know. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, but if you have any questions of clarification, just maybe just turn the mic on and speak out and ask away. This is a paper based on a paper that I wrote with a good colleague, Marcel Boges. We're both open innovation scholars, which means that we are interested in how firms learn inwards and outwards across their boundaries from different sources of knowledge and how they use that to change and innovate. And we are both sort of fairly committed social media users as part of our work. In fact, we first met via social media almost 20 years ago, and just knew each other from being online, and ended up working together, collaborating together, doing special issues together. This paper was an invited piece in a practitioner journal, and basically we were asked to write a practitioner piece for the practitioners of business academics, helping academics to think about how they produce research which changes behavior and makes society a better place. And the role of social media in terms of doing that. We argue and explain that social media is just one tool which helps us span boundaries, not just for dissemination of work, but also for forming collaborations, framing research, pre-testing research, actually getting data for research. And so, as open innovation scholars who have an interest in social media, and as Martin said, I've also done research over the years on social media and what it is and how it varies. This was a work that we were very interested to sort of do. Just some framing questions to start off with. I realise not everybody, in the audience is a business academic, people from different parts of Lancaster universities, but just think about why do we do what we do? And the answers I give here, are mostly from a business school professor perspective, but why do we do what we do? Why did you decide to do a PhD in your area, in business, your area of business, your area beyond business? What made you do it? Yes, a passion for learning, yes, an interest in a topic, but why did you want to do it? And and for many people, it starts off with to understand business and management. You want to become an expert in understanding it, understanding the issues, understanding why it works in a certain way, maybe understanding how to make it better in terms of that understanding, to help business and management be better by that understanding. And so most of us, at some point, this sort of answer to that question motivated possibly how we, ended up doing what we do. But what drives us now is this obsession with rankings and journal rankings and getting into top tier management journals. When we talk to people and we ask people, what they've done, people will say, I'm delighted to have gotten into a journal. We talk much less about what the work was about, particularly in business and management. I'm not too sure about other fields per se, but we're delighted to have got into a journal. We're delighted to have got a hit. We've ticked that box, but we talk less about the knowledge and that is in that publication and how it is impacting the world. And I also wanted to think a bit about, this game of publishing and think about how long it takes from idea to acceptance to get into a top tier management journal. And again, I recognize that people are in different disciplines, but if you look at the most prestigious journals within business and management, and just from personal experience and surveying people, it takes about 6 years from idea to acceptance. In terms of formulating, the research, maybe getting funding for the research, maybe trying it 2 or 3 different journals until it actually ends up getting into a top tier management journal. It's 6 years. And so think about that in terms of the timeliness of a research and the responsiveness of the research. And when you think about how much it costs to produce that paper, imagine you've got 3 authors, working on that. They're not working on it full time for 6 years, but they're spending a lot of time over 6 years. Maybe had some research money, funding a doctoral student or a researcher, data collection, So think about the time, the money, the review time. It's estimates put that at about 500,000 euros. And so one of the things that's facing business schools around the world is they're fairly happy with the impact that they have in terms of their teaching and students they produce and what they go on to do and their role in society. But many people, many organizations are saying, well, 6 years to produce a paper and several €100,000 to do it. And so, what is the impact? How is it changing the world? And so, business school research is expensive. Business school professors are expensive. And so this conversation comes up, intermittently, but also increasingly at different forums around the world, different stakeholders who are funding business schools. They're asking, what is the impact? And it's not that we all have to have applied impactful research, but to what extent do we, as a profession, have an impact and in terms of shaping our world. And what would happen if all the knowledge produced in top-tier management journals suddenly disappeared? Would the world be a better place? Would the world be a worse place? How is our knowledge changing the world? And some more questions. Think about universities in the world, various estimates, the sources for that estimate at the bottom of this slide. Almost 10,000 universities around the world. How many journal articles produced in all disciplines across all universities around the world? About 2 million a year. So that's all disciplines around the world. About 2 million papers are produced a year. What percentage are read by people other than the authors, the reviewers, and the editors? About 50%. What percentage of papers in social sciences journals get published or get cited? About 60%, but only 20% are actually read. So in terms of, we just cite papers that have been cited. And just to sort of, again, framing and setting the scene for what motivates myself and Marcel to do what we do with social media, and to why we preach, open scholarship and its potential benefits of leading to more, engaged, impactful outcomes is a beautiful paper from Dennis at the University of Sussex, and it's a very, very highly cited paper. It's a beautiful paper to read. It's very short. It's an opinion piece largely, and but he says that many publications are written purely to further our careers rather than to advance our knowledge. I.e., we want to get into top-tier journals. We want to make sure we get tenure and promotion, which are obviously very, very important. We want to make sure that we're ref worthy. But he says our discipline is in a crisis. We've lost our way. We neglect really important issues in favor of bite-sized chunks of research that are more likely to find publication in top-tier journals. He says we also increasingly resort to pretentious, long-winded prose to create the illusion of theory development. The result is writing that can only be understood by those already in the field in terms of going forward. And so this is, part the context which motivates, this talk and this paper, and why we do what we do, myself and Marcel. But we do theory, and we make theoretical contributions, and we understand that, and we also aspire to and occasionally get in top tier journals. But we are in this position where we were reflecting on where we are and what we're doing. I'm also connected to and part of an organization called Responsible Research in Business and Management. This is set up by some very, very influential scholars around the world, former presidents of the Academy of Management. And again, it's an association which tries to nurture and shift more of more work in the area which is trying to develop knowledge that benefits business and society. And they give out scholarships, they give out awards. It's an information source. If you go to the website, you can see who they are, what they do. You'll see that it really is a who's who of many of the leading scholars in business and management. And they want us to imagine a world where business and management research is used more widely in practice of organizations. It may be that we go beyond some of these statistics in terms of, maybe less is more, the more is more impactful, and is making a difference. And so with that background and the context, we argue in the paper, and the focus of this seminar is that social media is just one tool, one particular technology for connecting with, learning with different sources of knowledge outside of your academic and professional domain. It's not just for dissemination, but it's for other aspects of the research process as well. For networking, for framing, for investigating, for disseminating, but also in terms of assessing impact. And we feel that the technology itself can help people develop knowledge that benefits business and society more broadly. And we talk about different ways in which people use social media. They use it to connect, to observe, to promote, and to influence. And this talk and and the work in the paper is based partly on personal experience, partly on research in terms of reflecting on how we use and what others say about how to use social media as part of our profession. So why use social media for research? In terms of, again, building upon that, Marcel and I are both big fans of the work of Andrew van der Ven, who recently passed away. We talked about the engaged scholarship. We talked about designing research, delivering research, and disseminating research with those that you are doing the research about. So not just doing research about, entities. So if you're doing research on technology licensing, do you talk to technology licensors, or do you just have a data set about technology licensing? And you've never spoke to a technology licensor because you have a wonderful data set and you're able to test some sweet hypotheses about that data set, and you're able to make a good, interesting, theoretical, and maybe even practical contribution. But you've never really met somebody who's done technology licensing, and you don't, and because you've just had this sweet data set. Andrew Hoffman, who's at Michigan, he sort of builds on Andrew's Van der Ven's work and talks about engaged scholarship in the sort of era of social media and in terms of using the technologies that we talk about in our paper to be an engaged scholar. And again, in terms of, we know from open innovation is that some of the most impactful innovations come from open innovation. If you look at industry defining innovations, they are often user-based or in terms of learning from how people are frustrated with, struggling with issues, and they don't come from R&D departments per se. And so when you look at the work on open innovation and it tries to sort of map what are the most industry defining innovations in banking, medical devices, sports, across many fields, many of them have an open innovation and in particular a user innovation aspect in terms of going forward. And as Martin said, almost 12 years ago, I wrote a paper on social media about how to use it and how it varies, and the different functionalities of different platforms and how businesses and individuals would use it. And so that's the background. And finally, in terms of our sort of tongue-in-cheek representation is that we said it. There are importance. There's value to being protected from society and being in an ivory tower, which gives us the freedom to think and do research in protected, supported ways. But there's also a flip side, is that if academic research is overly disconnected and disengaged from those we are studying, then, and we're doing, as Dennis wrote in his paper, we're just advancing theory after theory in terms of building theory. It's a bit like, the man on the left here who is just digging a deep hole without realizing that it's this metal detector that was just picking up his steel safety boots, or that, the theories we come up with, should work in practice, but the theory is not working as it should in practice. And so this is and I think, within the area of business and management, we see historically that, really great theoretical papers turn into Harvard Business Review papers and Sloan Management Review papers and California Management Review papers, because they do have practical aspects and they're often designed and delivered in an engaged way. And they were done that way before Andrew van der Ven even wrote about engaged scholarship. Other fields may be more engaged. I have a background in industrial engineering, and it was very engaged, and in fact, so probably overly engaged, in that we were working on problems for individual companies that didn't really change those individual companies, and maybe didn't even, and certainly didn't change the industry of the world. In terms of how to use social media, I think many people recognize its benefits for dissemination. Communicating your research progress and findings to your target audiences, and your target audiences will be based on, you know, who you network and who you have connections with on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever platform you might use. I would say, you know, in the last 20 years, there's obviously been a shift in terms of networking and disseminating. But in the article, we argue that social media is not just valuable for disseminating, it's also valuable for framing, investigating, and assessing. And that's what I'll talk about today. To do that, and in the paper, I talk about a couple of pieces of work that I've shifted into in recent years. So in the last 2 years, I've done some work on organizational bullshit, how to measure bullshit in organizations, how to deal with bullshit in organizations. The research on bullshit has grown since about 2009, when a philosopher called Harry Frankfurt produced a book on dealing with bullshit. And then, you know, things like various leadership around the world, various big changes around the world, COVID, Brexit, various, you know, in all sorts of domains, people, you know, are questioning the sort of veracity of statements and information made by leaders of countries, leaders of companies, and so the work on bullshit has taken off. And so in the paper on open academics practices, we use this particular paper as an example. We talk about, in terms of networking, how the networks that we use to help frame this paper started off with looking at, you know, and what you see here is the Twitter handles for key people in different disciplines. You know, on the left, you've got Andre Spicer, who's a dean at Bayes Business School. You've got Andreas Rasch, Bob Sutton. You know, these are people who, you know, either were publishing on bullshit in the workplace or related topics, such as in terms of misinformation and disinformation. And it was a very, very small community. That was my natural starting point. But then in terms of looking at the conversations that they have online, what they are sharing and stating, and that led me to sort of a whole range of practitioners. And again, this is just a sample shot. Lucy Kellaway is a journalist for the Financial Times. Scott Berkun is a very famous consultant and journalist in North America. Elon Musk has a lot to say about bullshit within the organizations, and his intolerance of acronyms and jargon, and the high levels of authenticity he demands within organizations. And then that was useful for framing. But then the biggest sort of change was the next group, which was, I discovered, you know, in terms of this different sort of online presence, I discovered that there were all these psychology researchers, many of them in Canada, who do experimental work on, can you bullshit a bullshitter? Why do people believe bullshit? Why do people produce bullshit? And then finally on the right, information researchers, Jevin West and Carl Bergstrom on the right, they created a course at the University of Washington in Seattle, top 50 university in the world. It's a course that's open to everybody in the university. It's called Calling Bullshit. They wrote a book on it. And so, yes, I was networking with these people, but I was networking with them for framing. You know, I wanted to understand different perspectives and to explore and formulate questions. I wanted to understand what bullshit was, but I also wanted to understand what it would mean in a business context, within a management context. And I was getting ideas that I wouldn't get just within my own particular domain. And the thing about social media is that it does help you to go across domains. It does have this sort of, you know, trickle effect where you can stumble across different people. And it's not just academics. You know, when people were, when you see the paper, the second paper there, this place is full of bullshit, an organizational bullshit scale. When I was sharing that in the dissemination stage, I got this email from a senior executive within a company in the US that employs 200,000 people. he said, you know, I'm responsible for survey practices. I work in our HR department. I would like to use this scale. And then that becomes a starting point of actually a whole new research project along the lines that myself and my colleagues, co-authors, would never have imagined going down in terms of how this stakeholder saw using our research and how to not just validate the scale, but also to extend it and apply it in different ways. You can also use social media as a source of data, although I have to say in the last week or so, Twitter's academic research project used to be free and had technical support, but because of changes at Twitter, it's no longer free, or they're wondering about how to charge for it. But Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, they're all sources of information about what people are doing and what people are saying in a real-time basis. But even if you don't, actually have the capabilities or the resources to collect and scrape data from the platforms, you can still use it to shape and pre-test research. In the paper that is part of this talk, I wanted to know about, two things. I wanted to know about the dark side of social media, and we used social media to understand the dark side of social media for research, but we also wanted to, we used it for pre-testing surveys in terms of the, getting feedback on, how a survey is functioning or not for different workplaces around the world. And again, these platforms are boundary spanning platforms. They allow you to reach out and connect and get insights and build. And we use this in terms of pre-testing, the paper that this talk is based on, but also the bullshit studies that we use as illustrative examples. So in the paper we talk about here, so just a very simple example, what do you think are the main risks and costs to academics who actively use social media to network and help frame and disseminate this research? That leads to maybe 30 or 40 different replies, follow up with people, talk to people, interview people. It was quite illuminating in that, and I'll talk about the risks, but the risks are different depending on, are you dealing with gender issues? Are you dealing with climate issues? Are you dealing with political issues? Are you a female? Are you a male? Are you a young scholar? Are you a senior scholar? And so, this was used to stimulate and trigger a key part of the investigation into the ideas in the paper, particularly around the dark side of using social media. Dissemination is what we do to share and spread our research. So telling the world about, our research progress, our research results, that we're starting a research project, and dissemination results in attention. People say, oh, look at what that person's doing. Look at what that university's doing. Look at what that research doing. And so attention is the extent to which we have posted something online and it's seen, it's reshared, it's discussed, and then from attention potentially can come impact. And impact is the extent to which research is cited, used, changed, and how people think and act. And so if you're interested in producing impactful research, if it's a secret, no one knows about your research, no one's come across your research through traditional channels because no one's reading your papers, no one's citing your papers, or, and if people are reading and citing it, it's going to be other academics, so there'll be academic impact. But if practitioners, policymakers who don't read academic papers, how are they going to understand what you've done if you don't disseminate and you don't get attention? You're unlikely to get impact. Just because you disseminate doesn't mean you'll get attention. You might disseminate something and it's not very interesting, it's not very useful to the people who you're connected to, and just because you get attention doesn't mean there'll be impact. And impact is quite difficult to measure beyond academic impact. We measure academic impact in terms of how it's cited, how it's used, how it's taught in syllabuses, but understanding to the extent to which it's changing how people behave in organizations and changing society, that's more difficult. However, this sort of technology is allowing us to digitally try and sort of track traces of this, and I'll talk about that. In terms of dissemination, I tend to have it dissemination at two stages. There's usually an acceptance stage of a publication. So if something has been accepted, I'm happy, I tell the world, I give everybody a sort of heads up that, that something I'm proud about has been accepted, and something that I think is worthy of attention has been accepted. And I just give a heads up about that. When the paper is assigned a digital object identifier, and I'll talk more about this, but a DOI is a sort of a code, a permanent code, which is given to papers, data sets, clinical trials, many different media objects which are associated with some sort of scholarly contribution. Most of the papers that we produce will have digital object identifiers. Once that happens, then I share the paper, and because I want the DOI to be tracked and measured, and people to know that the paper is associated with a DOI. Then I produce slides which have a DOI, and you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of these slides, the DOI for the paper and the DOIs for these slides are included on this particular digital object, which is this set of slides. I then do talks and interviews, which I'm doing now with about the slides in terms of sharing it. And then from the talks and interviews, sometimes come blog posts, and a blog post is coming out tomorrow actually on this. There's an organization called the LSE Impact Blog, a very influential blog run by London School of Economics about impactful research in the social sciences. They wanted to do a blog on this paper, on this talk. It will be posted tomorrow. And then at some point I will, depending on if I think the research is worthy, if I have a budget, if I have time, I will produce videos. The videos used to be animated videos, but now they're increasingly sort of narrated, recorded videos, a bit like this talk. When I talk about videos, this is the first video I produced for the social media paper. I'll just show you what it looks like, in terms of, I've got and so this was produced using a master's student, who had an interest in this sort of technology. We did it, 11 years ago. It was a 6-minute video explainer of the paper for different audiences. It's been viewed about 100,000 times. There are companies that actually will take papers and produce short video explainers from them. And in the world of sort of user innovation and user technology, there is now sort of technology which allows you to actually produce it. And so this video on the right here was produced by my son. He was a teenager, like a young teenager at the time. It was a summer project. I asked him to sort of read the paper, work on the paper, and use this platform called Powtoon to create a little video explainer of the paper. And as I said, it's a tool which a bit like PowerPoint. You choose it, you design it, you make it, you design it, you add the music. It's fairly easy to use, and so I got my son to do it as a project. And so this is different forms of dissemination, and again within the videos we sort of embed the DOI, and these become different ways of sharing. Just another example of the value of dissemination. Back in November in Rome at the University of Lewis, I gave a talk to 22 PhD students on how to write a theory paper. And then after doing that talk, I posted the slides on Google Drive, made them freely available, and then shared that these slides were available at Twitter and LinkedIn. 4 months later, those slides have been viewed nearly 100,000 times. They've been downloaded many tens of thousands of times. And so I just wanted to compare that. 22 students in person, lovely day, lovely experience, enjoyed it. I think they enjoyed it. But then I just adapted the slides to make them be readable in a standalone version, posted them on Google Drive, made them openly available, and just via Twitter and just through LinkedIn, shared them, and they've had over 100,000 views, and about half of that in terms of downloads. When you're thinking about dissemination, be cognizant of the sort of timescales and how dissemination, attention, and impact vary over time. When you tweet something, you get almost immediate responses. You can get a sense of whether people like it. You can get a sense of whether people are interested in it. If it really takes off, then you can see maybe news outlets, bloggers, journalists, other stakeholders, picking it up and talking about it. Then people start to sort of bookmark it in their Mendeley files, their folders. People will store it in different sort of databases. Then you can follow the conversations. And this graph comes from a website called Altmetric. And I don't know how many of you use Altmetric, but Altmetric is a bit like Google Scholar, but it tracks not just academic citations, but it tracks citations of your work, online, in blogs, online news, legal reports, policy reports, patents, course syllabi, and you can see over time, how something goes from being disseminated and getting attention within hours, getting attention within days, and then eventually getting impact in months or years later, and in terms of that digital trickle-down effect. As I mentioned, this all revolves around DOI. So when you look at digital outputs, data sets, clinical trials, journal articles, book chapters, things which we publish, produce, and can be stored digitally, they can have what we call persistent identifiers. DOIs are the ones which are probably most common to our field, but you'll see that SSRN, the online database of pre-printed papers, they have their own digital object identifiers. And those digital object identifiers are then tracked by technologies such as Altmetric or PlumX, to see how the work is getting attention and in some cases impact in things like news media, social media, Wikipedia, blogs, patents, and course syllabi. Who is listing your work in terms of it being taught, government reports, policy documents. For those of you who don't know how Altmetric works, it's if your university signs up to it, and many universities do sign up to it, you just go to Altmetric and you get a free account and log in, and then it will download. This is my browser, and you'll see up at the top up here is a little button in my browser. You get an Altmetric button, and so every time I go to anything online that has a digital object identifier, and you'll see that this paper, I was visiting my own paper, and it has as its web address a digital object identifier. I click on that Altmetric button, and then it gives me what's called the Altmetric donut. And the Altmetric donut gives me a score for this paper in terms of how much attention it is getting online in things like news outlets, blogs, patents, and so on, so in terms of going forward. And you can click on it, and you can actually, it doesn't just tell you the attention, it can take you to the attention. You can see what people are saying about your work online and how people are suggesting it should be used. You can see how they're criticizing it, how they are praising it in different outlets by clicking on the Altmetric button. It also tells you that, if you look here on the right, 2 million papers are produced a year across all fields. Altmetrics has been going for about 15 years or 14 years, maybe a bit less. So Altmetric has been going for, let's say, 13, 14 years, and it is tracking 36 million outputs over that 13 years, and 2 million every year is added to it. And it says that out of the 36 million outputs that have been produced so far, when I produced this slide, 21 million of them have a digital, some form of digital attention. And it tells me that this particular paper scores almost 12,000 out of 21 million. And then it says, yeah, but some papers are older and some papers are newer. And if it looks at papers of a similar age, it says, you know, this paper, I did this about a year ago. This paper was a 2020 paper. I produced a slide about a year later. It says there are about 370,000 outputs which have some sort of digital attention. And out of the 370,000 outputs of the similar age, this particular output ranks 436 in terms of attention. And then it also tells you for the journal. It says for the journal, in the history of the journal, or at least the last 12, 13 years of the journal, 838 things published in the journal have had some sort of research attention online, or some sort of attention online. This ranks number 2 in terms of papers of a similar age within the journal. 18 have had some attention online, and this ranks number 1. And so this is a very good way of using social media technology to assess attention. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to transmit into impact. So just to summarize, about 40% of articles receive no online attention in terms of the altmetric platform. It's important to recognize that altmetric attentions are not really equivalent to quality. You can be getting a lot of attention because you did very controversial research and maybe very sloppy research. You may be getting lots of attention because you did, you know, fabricated, false, misconduct research, and that's why you're getting all the attention. So it's important to click on the donut buttons and get a sense of what people are saying about the research and how they're using it. It sort of complements Scopus, Google Scholar, you know, measures of impact. This same way of assessing also you know, provides ways of understanding to what extent it's used in policy reports. So again, I can see that this European policy report cited Marcel and I's work on open innovation. I can also see, you know, to what extent my work is being used in patents. And in every case, it takes you to the document, it takes you to the conversation, it takes you to the tweet. So it's a very interesting way, very simple way of actually not just assessing impact and seeing the overall donut, but actually going in to look at the conversations and maybe forming collaborations with people who are saying nice things or enjoy your research or think it's useful. And then also, you know, social media, you know, these are, you know, some images which, you know, and where people have seen what I posted online and they say, yes, I use your framework, you know, in my office. We hand it out to all new employees. We start every meeting using this framework. And again, other people are saying, look, you know, I saw it, you know, on social media. I want to use your scale. I run an organization of 12,000 people. Can we meet? Can we chat? And so in terms of thinking about your research, it's a very influential way of doing this. When you look at how people use different social media, we argue that there are different sort of scales of using social media, you know, ranging from how passive and open you want to be in terms of using social media. Where myself and Marcel are probably on the right of this diagram most of the time, but sometimes we don't have the time and energy to be on the right, you know, and sometimes we do research which isn't worthy of being on the right, and we just observe and we just connect and we just follow. So an observer is somebody who's just like listening to the conversations that's going on. You're an academic wallflower. You know, a connector is somebody who's doing it for network purposes, you know, wants to have friends online, wants to have followers online. A promoter is somebody, you know, who's all about, look what I've done, look what my institution's done, yay, we're ranked so-and-so in the world, yay, my colleagues have done this. It's all about promoting and sharing. Influencing is about actively advocating, engaging in conversations, tracking what people are saying about you, your research, the topics, and doing that in a way where you're guided by logic and evidence, remembering that you're an academic and not a journalist and not a politician, doing it in ways where you use right images, videos, right types of media to connect with the audiences that you want to actually work with. I would say that, about half my papers, you know, I feel are worthy of promotion and influencing. I'm always in the background observing and connecting. if I have a paper which I think is, I'm passionate about and I want to share, and when I do promote it, it gets a lot of traction, it gets a lot of conversations. I might spend 2-3 weeks, a few hours a day, tracking, engaging with, responding to, following, learning from the conversations in the short term. And going back to this figure, once you do that, there's this initial burst of energy, which is in the first few days. It might be the first 2-3 weeks. And then that initial burst of social media energy then turns into maybe blogging energy or articles or interviews in terms of mainstream media. But it doesn't happen with every single paper, because not every single paper is interesting or actually gets any attention, despite what I might think it does. But I'm always, to some extent, half an hour a day observing, with my existing connections, every now and then building and adding to new connections, but periodically doing promoting and influencing, depending on sort of milestones in my sort of research pipeline. Just to finish off with, there are dark sides to using social media, not just for work, but just social media in general. It takes up time. I've given some indication of the time. I would say I would, on average, on a regular non-promoting influencing sort of period, I'm spending half an hour a day, 40 minutes a day, checking in, seeing what people are saying, seeing what's happening, what are people saying about how to use ChatGPT in terms of research and teaching, et cetera, that, in terms of the people who I admire within and beyond my discipline. But then there are these periods when suddenly I have something which I think is interesting, and then the world also thinks is somewhat interesting, and it leads to a whole lot of attention, a whole lot of engagement, a whole lot of learning and reframing of opportunities. You have to be disciplined, be goal-directed, because it can be quite addictive. Be wary of academic narcissism. Academic narcissism, I would say, is extreme sort of unfiltered promotion, where all you do is say, look at how great I am, and you do humble bragging. You say, oh, look, not another paper in an FT50. This is my 4th paper in the last, it's and you sort of like, I'm delighted, but it's so tough winning yet another Nobel Prize. We know that it's better to brag than to humble brag. There's research on this. We know that if you humble brag, any sort of backlash you get will be bigger if you're a female than a male. And in terms of people studying humble bragging within, this is again someone who follows me, and this is a PhD student in business at Columbia University. He actually studies human peacocking, and particular academics who do human peacocking, and in terms of promotion. So this would be like extreme forms of promotion. Be wary about trolling and bullying. Myself and Marcel, because we're dealing with innovation and open innovation, it's not climate change, it's not gender issues, it's not identity issues, it's not riddled with politics. We just haven't experienced much trolling and bullying. But when you look at the research on trolling and bullying, if you get 2 academics in the same area, doing the same research, doing the same dissemination online, and it's sort of an area of research which is more likely to attract trolls or bullies. We know that if you're younger, if you're female, you're going to get a lot more, much more of a backlash than if you're male. Males will do it too, but you measure it. It's measured in terms of how much of a backlash it's getting, how sustained it's going forward. When you look at research and practice on how to deal with trolling and bullying, it says keep a record. That's partly easy to do because there is a digital record, but people delete accounts, but copy and keep accounts. If it's so traumatic to do it because the bullying and trolling you're getting is so aggressive, then ask a colleague to do it. ask someone in the university to actually keep a record, saying you're doing this controversial research. It's both loved and hated equally in terms of the findings, and it's having an impact on you in terms of of how safe you feel and how confident you feel, and you want to keep a record, but you can't. You want to take a break, and you want someone else to do it for you. This is the sort of practices that are advocated by sort of unions and faculty associations and leaderships around universities. It's also important to recognise to what extent your organisation really cares about engaged open scholarship. I work at SFU, and we call ourselves the Engaged University. I would say, even though we call ourselves the Engaged University, it's our logo. It is our logo. The Engaged University in Canada. And it started 10, 15 years ago. But nothing changed in terms of hiring practices, performance measures, promotional practices, tenure practices. It's a way of framing who we are. In contrast, Marcel, who works at the Technical University of Eindhoven, he is working in an institution which recognises and rewards open scholarship. He wins awards. They include it within their hiring criteria. They include it within their promotional criteria, and they celebrate it. And so I give these two sort of contrasting examples. One is more of a branding, labeling exercise, and one is actually trying to institutionalize, that they recognize open, engaged scholarship by actually offering, incentives and rewards and support to actually back up what they say. So just to summarize, social media is just one way of helping to be more open at networking, framing, investigating, disseminating, assessing within our research. It complements the rigorousness of doing closed, protected research, where you're not influenced by external stakeholders and you are immersed in your field. And I think there's some sort of ambidexterity going on here, where obviously you want to be able to you want to know what goes on in your field, and you want to know what constitutes an interesting theoretical contribution within your field. But at the same time, what does it mean beyond your field and beyond academia? It helps researchers and their research to become more engaged and impactful. And also to note, that social media, it's based on business models which are about attention. So that's why it's very powerful about promoting dissemination and attention. It's based on business models about building networks. And so it is a very powerful tool, but it's also a very powerful tool that can increase the impact of mediocre and highly flawed research. Marcel would love to, and I would love to hear from you. I can make these slides available. They've been sent to Lancaster anyway. The paper is available at various places, but I'd love to hear from you now and post this talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. Wonderful. And we've got a bit of time for questions, and we have some questions in the Q&A. I think I'll just ask those who have written questions to just put the mic on and the camera and ask away. Mike Ryder, you were first in. Hello, Mike. You want to pose your question about publishing this stuff?
Yeah, hi, thanks so much for that talk, Ian. I've actually engaged with you through social media before I even knew you were going to give this talk. So this actually is quite a treat to talk to you in person. So I work in digital marketing, and one of the big issues we have is basically academia can't keep up. And so it's very difficult to teach students and sort of draw on academic scholarly articles or even do research in this field, because basically by the time it's published 6 years later, everything's changed. And so I wondered what your thought, my first question, because I posted a couple. My first question was really then, what do you think we do about this? How do we cope, or how does one build a career in digital marketing in an academic sense, I guess? Because it's really difficult, because the 4 stars won't take it.
Yeah. That's a great question and great comment. I think we as a profession, and we're going to lag, are going to have different outlets, and I say, like, if you want to look at the most interesting work on ChatGPT at the moment, it's coming out from professors like Ethan Mollock at Wharton, who's writing blog posts on almost a weekly, daily basis in terms of shaping our ideas. Now, the extent to which Wharton rewards him or likes him for that, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, he's not I'm not too sure if he has tenure there, but he's a superstar professor. But he's sense making, he's framing, he's sharing on a blog-based basis. Feels like computer science. That's why they value conference publications more than we do in our field, because they're having updates every year or every 6 months at conferences, and they're sharing and disseminating work. We're in this, people beyond our profession are amazed that it takes 4, 5, 6 years to write a piece of work in terms of going through, and they are very good pieces of work, but they have different impacts and different abilities to make an impact. So I think if you're a young professor starting out, in business and management, I wouldn't say that your academic career is based on blog posts and articles, however influential they are. You're not going to do it. You have to have this mixed mode sort of activity. Otherwise, until universities change and until our profession changes, those sort of outlets, real-time outlets, and are not going to get recognized. But I think they will, increasingly will over time. But it's still going to be a few years.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's why I loved your reference to Tourish, by the way. One of my all-time favorite articles.
Thank you, Mike. We'll see if there's time for your other question in a bit, but let's. This is something that I was particularly struck about when I heard you speaking before, in this using DRIs to track output. Shelley, do you want to put your question? You're on mute, Shelley.
Yeah, I'm not an academic. I'm actually a research project manager, and I manage the projects, but I also manage various social media channels. And our academics are always having great ideas about, let's do blogs, let's do YouTube, which is brilliant. But then how do we measure that impact? Because it's not just likes and clicks. How do we measure and report to our funders and our kind of bodies that social media is worth it? And we've put, I've previously worked on a research project where we've actually recruited researchers through Twitter. We've made the connections with professional bodies. We've done webinars in the sector. But how do we report that if it's not just DOI clicks and metrics?
So I'd say that you have to go beyond the DOI clicks. And when you look at Altmetric and Plummetrics, so I would say that there are these shallow indicators: likes, views, downloads. These are like, the first order ones. And then you're saying, but from that, I can see now that it's been cited in these 3 legal rulings. It's been cited in these 2 policy reports, and you can actually cite them. So you go from thousands and thousands of likes and downloads to like 4 or 5 instances where it's used in reports, legal rulings, patents, in terms of going. And then, and this is getting, these technologies are getting more sophisticated. And then you say, well, now, and look, now this is used, only 2 years after being published, this is used in like, over 100 course syllabi around the world. But this knowledge is being used to teach students in terms of going forward. And so, so 3-4 years ago, it was just likes and downloads and views. But now we have like, where is it being used in terms of, and that list of where it's being used and digitally tracked is becoming more extensive and more interesting and useful for understanding impact. To what extent it's actually changing behaviors and changing practices and making the world better, that's still a big gap, but you can see how it's being used in different ways.
Yeah, we've recently published some NHS guidance on the project, and it's trying to find who's picked that up, who's using it, and how have they used it? Is it a page? Is it the whole thing? What have they done with it to, for this 4 years of work we've done, because it was a 4-year project. How is it just that we've printed it out and we've all had a look and said that's great, or are we implementing it in our trusts? And that's where we're sort of.
And the key thing is you can even go and talk to the people. You can actually say, like, I see that you use this. Can we talk to you? Can we do a case on this? Can this be our next ref case in terms of going forward? And so you can use it as a starting point.
No, that's brilliant. That's really helpful, because it's helps me speak to my bosses, who are all academics who have great ideas, but then sort of throw them at me and say, we need to do blogs. And I go, well, that's great, but why are we doing blogs? Who's going to listen to them? what's the point of us spending the time doing it? You know, and if you know, it's all right saying we're going to do podcasts, but where are they going? Who's listening to them?
I think this is an amazing area to think about. Really is.
Don't do podcasts.
No,
Don't do podcasts.
Not podcasts, but the whole impact tracking thing is really fascinating, isn't it?
Thanks, you.
Shelley. Yeah. There are a couple of questions in sort of similar territory on the sort of respective roles of the individual academic versus the institution. Katerina, do you want to frame your question around that issue?
Can do. Hello, and thank you, Ian, for the talk. Yeah, I guess it's the usual debate that we tend to have, because obviously we're doing blogs, we're doing podcasts, we're doing social media, we're writing hashtags, but obviously all of this takes time, let alone learning the software and finding all of the instruments attached to that. So it's how do we find that balance between how much needs to be done by each individual academic versus where does the comms team of a department or a whole university step in and take over? And I'm very jealous when I hear about departments that tend to have like a specialist communicator around that science topic specifically that can be on hand, to train them, but also takes over some of those tasks and then, you know, can advise them very targeted as they're doing the work as well.
Thanks, Katerina. So I think there's a number of things. One is it depends on the individual. So I get quite energized by using this. I find it as a form of energy. It's a different form of, you know, rather than playing Candy Crush, you know, in terms of procrastinating, you know, I'm writing a paper, I'm doing stuff, and then I want a break, I will. So I find it, but that's me, and other people it's less, you know, that doesn't appeal to it. So it depends on you individually in terms of your energy and your time. It depends on your institution. And so if your institution doesn't recognize it, your profession doesn't recognize it, it depends on, you know, your personal passion for wanting to do it, and in terms of sharing and disseminating. That's one thing. But then so I'll just give you an example. So my institution, my business school, you know, has a marketing communications department. You know, so they manage our Twitter accounts and they do things, etc., etc. And so for the LSE Impact blog, for example, you know, myself and Marcel we've been both very busy with lots of things this year. And when LSE Impact blog, I said, I will ask my my Marcoms department to draft something, you know. So I reached out to them and said, look, you've got this paper, got this opportunity, and they were able to draft something, and they drafted something, and you know, and then we worked it and reworked it and everything else, and then we submitted it to the LSE Impact blog, and it will come out tomorrow. I know schools, and it depends, you know, it depends if you have a big research group. So, you know, I was in Austria recently, big, you know, entrepreneurship research group, you know, very senior professor, 30, 40 people underneath. You know, they dedicate somebody, they work as a team and stuff. And so within their research groups, you know, it's someone's role who has ability, has the inclination to do this, etc. So while myself and Marcel have personally been very hands-on in terms of doing this, because it suits us in terms of who we are and everything else. For many people, it doesn't. And so maybe you outsource it to someone within your department, someone within your research team. And if you can't do that, then that's obviously a problem.
Thanks, Ian. Can I ask one?
Sure.
What about late starters, e.g. me? Despite reading your paper, I never really got into using Twitter. I've been on LinkedIn, but really only use it to keep track of who's changed jobs and occasionally posting an advert for a job at Lancaster. So is it worth starting at this late stage?
Again, it comes down to you, Martin, personally, in terms of what energizes you and drives you, and where you want to be, you know, in terms of doing things. You know, so I'm not selling this for everybody. It's not for everybody. It's not, people have different skills and gifts and also, you know, interests in terms of going forward. But the key thing is that model of networking, framing, investigating, disseminating, and assessing. It's somewhat linear, but you jump backwards and forwards in terms of how, you know, you do things on a project. But the issue is if you don't have a network and you're not actually engaged with it, it's actually hard to actually. And so you have to have some sort of online presence in the first place. Like, it's hard if you don't have a Twitter account and don't have a LinkedIn account. or if you do and you have no followers or you're inactive, then it's hard to do that. So you have to have that sort of, you know, that basis, and that takes work, that takes time and effort in the first place. And again, you have to enjoy that or see some value in it. And so it depends. You know, I'm while I'm passionate about it, I'm wary about over prescribing it. It's never too late, but as long as it interests you.
Yeah, good advice. Thanks. Okay. Mike also asked, Mike Ryder, who spoke earlier, I'll just put this one directly to Mike. What do you think of the conversation as a means for research dissemination?
I published something in the conversation. At SFU, our university does lots of training courses and connects with, you know, with conversation. I think it's one of the founding, you know, funders of the conversation. So the conversation is this sort of online magazine, online newspaper that's publishes only articles written by professors. I have to say I was very impressed with their process in terms of how they help you and how they develop you. I was quite impressed with how they, you know, they go through that process. So, you know, if you have never written a blog before, you've never written any sort of media piece, this is a good starting point. Like a journal, they make a decision on whether they think what you've done is interesting enough to be newsworthy. And so, you know, it helps if it's topical. So if you're doing stuff, you know, on ChatGPT or doing stuff on, you know, and it has different sort of outlets around the world. There's a conversation in Canada, a conversation in the UK. So there's something that's, you've done research, you know, which is newsworthy to the current news in your region, and they like the research, and then they will help you to write that piece, you know, and they have this very, very good template and this very, very good editorial support. So I'm generally in favor of a conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a bit of a discussion with them at the BAM conference a couple of years ago when we chaired it at Lancaster, and I was impressed with their approach. And just I think we've been quite active in producing stuff for both from the school and the university as a whole. They like us. We produce stuff. Okay. We've had a wonderful hour, I think. Great insights. I'll draw the session to a close now. This has been recorded, so please refer back to it to watch the highlights again, or action replays, or even tell your friends and colleagues about the talk. I think it's a very valuable insight, and I think a much more sophisticated insight than you might get from my sort of vague idea that it would be good to be on Twitter, maybe. It's a good structured approach that really reveals the value of the open academic in general, and the particular tools that Ian's been talking about. Thanks very much, Ian. And I know you probably had to get up early to do this.
Not too early. It's very reasonable. So thank you. Thank you. And I know people, this is the end of the day for people. So thank you for attending, and thanks for hosting my.
Okay. And we can't, I don't think, do a real round of applause, but if you'd show your appreciation in some way, I think we've got reaction buttons and things like that.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ian.
Have a good evening.
And thanks, Paul, for looking after us in the background there. Bye, Ian.
Bye-bye.